And there's breaking news again out of the Vatican, and that is being reported by Dr. Micah Hickson at LifeSiteNews. This is very important news for those of you who've been paying attention to the Holy Sacrifice of the Mass, the central thing in the Church. Well, it's up for a new rite. Uh, we're breaking, or Dr. Hickson is breaking at LifeSiteNews, this story that the new rite is being proposed, a Mayan Rite of the Mass, and it is up for approval, it seems, on May the 5th. I'm going to get into it just a little bit here, but this report is a very lengthy, detailed report. You need to go to lifesitenews.com to check out for yourself. Really stunning what's happening. It is reminiscent of the Pachamama Mass, and you'll see exactly why, remembering that Pachamama is the earth goddess. So let me go into this story a little bit and read some portions of it for you from Dr. Hickson's work. And by the way, go to lifesitenews.com right now and check it out. At the beginning of March, news came out of Mexico that a group of Mexican bishops had met in the Diocese of San Cristobal de las Casas with Bishop Aurelio Garcia Macias, Undersecretary of the Vatican's Dicastery on Divine Worship and Discipline of the Sacraments, and in order to work on a new indigenous rite of the Mass inspired by Mayan traditions. The Mexican bishops had met Pope Francis in February during their ad limina visit to Rome, and they announced that they wished to send a proposal of such a new rite in May to Rome for approval. So catch that, it's in May. That it's going to be sent to Rome for approval. So such a Mayan rite has already been practiced in the Diocese of San Cristobal. It has been approved by the Mexican Bishops' Conference. As with the Amazonian rite, it is clear that Pope Francis is in support of these new enculturated forms of the Roman Rite of the Mass. At the center of this new Mayan rite in Mexico are several elements that were already on the reform agenda of the 2019 Amazon Synod, namely a strengthening of the role of the women in the liturgy, probably a step toward female deacons, a prominent role of married indigenous deacons, and a form of liturgical enculturation that has clear signs of idolatry. And as we were all able to see in the worship of the Pachamama idols at the time of the Amazon Synod in Rome. But now it's another form of paganism that's being promoted by Rome. The ancient Mayan religion is permeated by polytheism. The earth, the sun, the moon, and the animals are all regarded as being gods. Also by animism, the belief that objects and creatures have a soul, and by the belief in communications with one's ancestors and even worshiping them. And by human sacrifice, which of course included women and children as part of its worship. So Cardinal Felipe Arizmendi Esquivel, the former bishop of this particular Mexican diocese, San Cristobal de las Casas, in the southern Chiapas region, is a leading force of these adaptations of the Roman Rite and has made it clear in multiple interviews and statements that Pope Francis has encouraged this work early on in his pontificate. And this cardinal describes it this way. He says, in December 2013, I requested a personal audience with him, that's with the Pope, to discuss matters in my diocese of San Cristobal de las Casas, such as liturgical translations into the indigenous languages of the place, and especially the permanent diaconate for indigenous people, which, according to this prelate, was stopped due to inaccurate reports reaching Rome. Of course, it was stopped by Rome at the time before Francis because the church found it impossible to do what they were asking for. We'll get into what it is they're asking for now. Arizmendi continued. He said, the Pope, that is, he received me together with my then auxiliary bishop, Enrico Diaz, and listened to us very attentively and kindly with great openness. He has since told us that the permanent diaconate could be a very timely solution in indigenous communities and that more should be encouraged. This is recommended in Queridia Amazonia number 92. The current bishop of the Diocese of San Cristobal de las Casas, Bishop Rodrigo Aguilar Martinez, who was appointed in 2018 by Pope Francis, described himself the elements of this new rite of an indigenous mass with Mayan elements in a March 14th interview. He calls the new rite, and I quote, Roman rite with three main elements of adaptation. They are prayers led by a principal, who is normally an upright layman, the office of censing mainly conducted by women, and some indigenous Thanksgiving dances as a form of prayer at the end of Mass. So Women incensing the altar at different moments of the Mass is also foreseen, as it's being practiced already, for example, as you can see in this photos of this priestly ordination. But there's another example of women holding the Mayan incense burner in this video. Take a look at this. But there are also with this Mass ritual dances that are part of the Mayan culture that are foreseen at the end of Mass, as the bishop said. Well, such Mayan dances, ritual dances, they're usually seen as a way to communicate with different gods and spirits. The scholarly World History website describes Mayan ritual dance as, quote, dance is another overlooked ritual. Dance rituals were performed to communicate with the gods, end quote. So the dominant liturgical role of women is also visible, according to Cardinal Arizmendi. And this is what he says, and I quote for you. Upon arrival at the altar, it is kissed by the celebrant, and if present, by the deacons and his wife. So the women are also going up and kissing the altar as well. I mean, this is obviously a step toward a female diaconate and then priesthood. But most striking when watching this ceremony or this talk is that Pope Francis already has done this. Pope Francis incensed the altar together with two women deacons, both of whom had Mayan incense burners in their hands. Take a look for yourself. The Mayan altar is involved in this. And this is a very important element. And here's where we really get back to the idea of a Pachamama or mother goddess. It's very important to these practices, this Mayan altar. A Mayan altar is dedicated to the gods and beliefs of the Mayan religion. These altars can already be found in Catholic churches in the area and many church ceremonies. So if you remember, during the Pachamama ceremonies, they had this two Pachamama statues in the ground. Everybody was face planted to the ground adoring these false Pachamama statues. And this is a type of Mayan altar that they made there. Well, that Mayan altar was also made inside of St. Peter's Basilica. Not Mayan, but indigenous altar was made inside this thing on the floor that you see with blankets and flowers and whatever else they put on it and candles. But you can see it also in the churches there in Mexico, in some of them. And on this topic, Cardinal Arizmendi, he wrote this, quote, in some places, it is customary to make, in front of the altar of the Mass, the so-called Mayan altar, with flowers and colored candles, according to the four directions of the universe, with fruits of the earth. Now, let's stop right there. Four directions of the universe. Where have we heard that before? Well, I'll tell you where we heard that before, because I was right there. Do you remember when Pope Francis came to Canada? Do you remember that they had that pagan ceremony with an indigenous shaman calling on the four directions of the universe? And he had Pope Francis and all the cardinals present put their hands on their chests and close their eyes as he blew a bone whistle and called on the spirits of the four directions to open the door to the circle of spirits. Watch it for yourself. It's unbelievable.
I'd like for you to put your hands on your heart, each one of you. The heart can be like a talking stick, but that's where the Creator put wisdom in humans. And we often need to remind ourselves of this. It's an important gesture to connect ourselves with that wisdom. I asked the Western grandmother to give us access to the sacred circle of spirits so they can be with us, so we can be united and stronger together. I will ask the east direction to open its door so we can have access to that direction. I will ask the southern direction to open its door as well. To have access to that direction, I will ask the western direction.
So there is this Bartole Espinoza Vasquez, who's an expert in the Mayan culture and a member of the South team of the diocese. And he was responsible for installing the altar, this Mayan altar, that was placed during the official ceremony held on January 25th of 2022 to remember the deceased former head of the diocese, Bishop Ruiz Garcia. Now, some of Espinoza Vasquez's explanations of the Mayan altar really do speak for themselves. And listen up. Remember, Pachamama means the earth goddess, or the mother of the earth, whatever. So, and this is the quote from the guy from the southern part of the diocese, the expert on the Mayan altar. He says, and I quote, "In the center of," and he's talking about the Mayan altar, "is blue and green that represent the heart of heaven and Mother Earth." Let me read that again. In the center of the, and he's talking about the Mayan altar, is blue and green that represent the heart of heaven and Mother Earth. When we blow the shell, we are calling on the spirit of our ancestors. We are connecting our hearts with theirs. And among the elements of the altar, there's also a pumbo that has a sacred herb that we use called bankilal, which is like receiving the spirit of the older brother. It is made of tobacco. We have the copal, where the incense is placed. It is to purify the space. He continues, the burning of copal is believed to call upon this kind of stuff is, first of all, almost exactly what we saw when Pope Francis came to Canada, participated in by Pope Francis and the cardinals who were there. And these are obviously pagan elements that have no place in Catholic worship of any kind, let alone the Holy Sacrifice of the Mass. The burning of copal is believed to call upon the god Tlaloc and the goddess Chalaluchki or something like that. And both of these deities were associated with fertility and creation. And you get that from a spiritualist website that points out what it exactly is we're doing. This is a very serious thing. There's much more here. Please go to LifeSiteNews.com and check out the full report by Dr. Micah Hickson. For LifeSite News, this is John-Henry Westen. We need to pray for the conversion of Pope Francis. God bless you.